Warning disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction inspired by real-life emotional dilemmas. Any resemblance to actual persons or events is purely coincidental. The story is meant to explore the emotional complexity of trust and relationships and does not intend to give legal or psychological advice. Maya never believed in perfect moments until that night in Florence. Under the golden lights of the Ponte Vecchio, with violins playing softly in the background, Ethan knelt down, his voice trembling with emotion, and asked her to marry him. Her heart leapt, tears streamed down her cheeks, and without hesitation, she said yes. Tourists clapped, strangers took photos, and for a brief second, the world felt still, suspended in joy. They had been together for 4 years, growing, evolving, and surviving life's unpredictable tides. Maya had watched Ethan build his tech startup from scratch, staying by his side through the sleepless nights, the failed pitches, and the doubt. He had been her rock when her mother passed away. Their love wasn't a fairy tale, it was real, raw, and full of shared history. After the proposal, the days that followed felt like a dream. They sipped wine in Tuscany, talked about future kids, debated wedding venues, and even discussed moving closer to Maya's sister in Seattle. Then, on a quiet afternoon in their hotel room, as sunlight streamed through the curtains and Maya hummed while folding her clothes, Ethan spoke, his tone too casual for what he was about to say. "Babe, before we get deeper into planning, I think we should talk about a prenup." The words landed like cold rain on her warm skin. She froze. "A prenup?" He nodded, not meeting her eyes. "Yeah, it's not a big deal. Just something to have in place. You know, just in case." Her heart thudded, not from shock, but from hurt. Just in case? Everything blurred for a moment. The memories of them scraping together money for ramen dinners, the nights she stayed on call helping him edit investor decks, the hours she spent believing in him when even he didn't, all suddenly felt like transactions to be itemized, protected, separated. "You want to talk about a prenup?" 3 days after proposing to me, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's standard," he said quickly. "It doesn't mean anything about how I feel about you. It's just smart." Maya didn't speak. She stared out the window, past the Tuscan hills, past the vineyards, to a future that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Ethan reached for her hand, but she gently pulled away. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic or loud, it was quiet, deep, and uncertain. In that moment, Maya realized something terrifying. She wasn't just planning a wedding anymore. She was standing at a crossroads between love and fear, between trust and protection. And everything had just changed. The flight back from Italy was silent. Ethan sat beside Maya, scrolling through emails on his laptop, occasionally glancing at her. But Maya didn't look back. She stared out the window, watching clouds drift by like the thoughts swarming her mind, heavy, slow, impossible to pin down. Back home, the routine returned. Morning coffee, rushed schedules, grocery runs. But something had shifted, subtle but sharp. A coldness lingered in the spaces where warmth once lived. One evening, as Maya sat curled up on the couch, she flipped through their old photo album on her phone. There was a picture of them from 2 years ago, during the early days of Ethan's company. They were in his tiny apartment, surrounded by ramen cups and whiteboards scribbled with startup ideas. He looked exhausted, but his arm was around her, and he was smiling. She remembered that night. He'd lost a major investor, was ready to quit. She stayed up with him till 4 a.m., typing up a revised pitch deck. The next week, he landed a new investor and always told everyone she saved the company. But now he wanted protection from her. The thought made her chest ache. She brought it up one night, softly. "Ethan, why now? Why a prenup?" He paused. "Because it's smart, Maya. Because we've both worked hard. And because if anything ever happened between us, I want us both to be protected." "But protected from what?" she asked. He hesitated. from life being unpredictable. But love is unpredictable, Ethan. Isn't that the point? We're supposed to choose each other anyway. He looked at her with something unreadable in his eyes. It's not about love. It's about being prepared. And there it was, the sentence that stuck like a thorn. It's not about love. Maya stood up and walked to the kitchen, pretending to refill her glass. But inside, she was unraveling. If this wasn't about love, then what was marriage even supposed to be? The next day, she confided in her best friend, Lila. Over coffee, Maya explained everything. Lila listened, then sighed. Look, prenups aren't always bad. They can actually protect both of you. I'm not saying they're evil, Maya replied. I'm saying they're wrong for us. For me. I don't want a man who prepares for failure before we even begin. Lila reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Then you need to ask yourself something important. Do you feel like he still sees you as the same woman who stood by him when he had nothing? Maya didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because in her heart, she already knew something had been lost between them, and it wasn't money. It was trust. Maya stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair, but her mind was far from the reflection. She kept replaying Ethan's words in her head. It's not about love. It's about being prepared. It was such a clean, clinical way to explain something that felt deeply personal to her. For days, she found herself drifting in and out of old memories, recalling birthdays where they had nothing to give but handwritten letters, the small apartment with a leaking ceiling, the night he broke down crying after his father passed away, and how she held him without saying a word. She had been all in from the beginning. And now, when their lives were finally stable, when success had caught up with them, he wanted to talk about splitting things up in case it didn't work out. One night, she sat beside him on the bed. The air was still. Ethan was answering emails, not looking up. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. Do you think I'd take from you? She finally asked, barely above a whisper. Ethan blinked, taken off guard. What? No. Of course not. Then what's this really about? She pushed. Because I keep thinking about how we started, and how we got here. And it feels like somewhere along the way, I became someone you needed to protect yourself from. He set the laptop aside. Maya, that's not true. Then tell me what is. Because right now, all I see is a man preparing for disaster before we've even begun the journey. Ethan sat still for a long moment. It's just, I've seen too many marriages fall apart. My cousin's wife took half his business. My parents' divorce was a nightmare. I don't want to end up there. And what about us? She asked. Do you trust me, Ethan? He hesitated. And that pause, those 3 seconds of silence, were louder than any words he could have said. Maya stood up and walked out of the room, her chest tightening. She didn't cry. Not yet. But something inside her cracked. Later that night, she pulled out an old journal from her drawer. She hadn't written in it in over a year. But now, the words flowed out of her like a flood. I gave you my loyalty, my love, my time, and my belief. And you gave me a contract. I was ready to marry a man who saw me as his partner, not his liability. If trust has conditions, then what is it really worth? She didn't plan to show it to him. But writing it helped her understand something she hadn't been ready to admit. This wasn't about money. It wasn't even about the prenup. It was about the silent message behind it. I love you, but I don't fully trust you. And for Maya, that changed everything. A week later, Ethan invited Maya to dinner with his family. It'll be good for us, he said, trying to smooth over the tension that had been quietly stretching between them. Let's just have a normal night. Maya agreed, though her heart wasn't in it. She hoped maybe being around people who loved them both would bring some comfort, maybe even remind Ethan what really mattered. They arrived at the upscale restaurant, dim lighting, polished silverware, a private room for the family. Ethan's parents were already seated, along with his older brother, Andrew, and Andrew's wife, Claire. They exchanged polite hugs and smiles, but Maya felt the distance underneath the formal warmth. The The conversation stayed light. Wedding plans, venues, even jokes about Ethan's childhood mishaps. For a while, it felt almost normal. Almost. Until Andrew, swirling his glass of wine, leaned back and smirked. So, Ethan tells me you're doing the smart thing. Getting a prenup drawn up before the real mess begins. Maya's fork froze midair. She looked at Ethan, who suddenly stared hard at his plate. Andrew laughed. Can't blame him. After what happened with Matt and his ex, you've gotta play defense. People change after the vows. Claire elbowed him. Andrew, but it was too late. The room dimmed around Maya. Her heart was pounding, her breath caught in her chest. She realized then Ethan hadn't just mentioned the prenup to his family. He'd discussed it, maybe even planned it with them. And here she was, sitting across from a table of people who saw her not as family, but as a risk. She pushed her plate gently away. "Excuse me," she said quietly, rising from the table. Ethan followed her out to the hallway, calling her name. "Maya, wait, please." She turned to him, eyes burning. "So this was always the plan? You told them before you told me." "It wasn't like that," he insisted. Andrew and I talk. He gave me advice." "Oh, so your brother helped you decide how to protect yourself from your fiancé?" she said, her voice sharp now. "Is that how we're doing this?" He looked pained. "It wasn't meant to hurt you." "But it did," she snapped. "Not because of the document, but because you didn't even think to shield me from the judgment behind it. You let them turn our love into a strategy." Ethan reached out, but she stepped back. "I walked with you through every storm," she whispered. "And now that the sun's out, you're building a shelter in case it rains again." He was silent. And Maya knew this wasn't just about one dinner or one joke. It was about everything the prenup represented. The quiet vote of no confidence. The unseen cracks in what she thought was unshakable. That night, she didn't sleep beside Ethan. She stayed at a hotel, staring at the ceiling, wondering how two people so in love could end up speaking different languages. Maya sat by the window of her hotel room, the city lights casting faint glows on her skin. Outside, cars moved like rivers of quiet noise, but inside, everything felt still. She hadn't cried yet, not the kind of crying that leaves you hollow. Instead, her silence was louder than tears, heavier than words. On the small desk by the bed was her leather journal, the one she hadn't touched since she moved in with Ethan. With trembling hands, she opened it and began to write. At first, it was just sentences, half-finished thoughts, pieces of pain spilling out. Then it became a letter. A letter to Ethan. "You asked me to marry you under the stars in Italy. I thought that meant you saw a future with me, with us. But when you brought up the prenup, you didn't just hand me a legal document. You handed me doubt. You handed me the idea that I'm someone you might need to be protected from. That our love, no matter how deep, isn't strong enough to survive without conditions. You may see this as smart, logical, but I don't want to marry logic. I want to marry a man who trusts my heart more than his fears." She stopped, gripping the pen tightly, her chest rising and falling with every breath that felt like effort. She wrote more, pouring every unspoken truth onto the page. "I stood by you when you had nothing. I never asked you for more than your honesty. And now, when you have something to lose, you're acting like I'm here to take it. I'm not the enemy, Ethan. I'm the reason you didn't give up when things got hard. I'm the woman who built a life with you from nothing. And I can't be with someone who sees my love as a threat to their freedom." She closed the journal, hands shaking, heart aching. She didn't plan to give him the letter, not yet. Maybe not ever. But writing it was like standing in her truth, claiming her pain and reminding herself of the strength that had been buried beneath months of compromise. The next morning, Maya called in sick to work. She needed space. Time. Clarity. She walked through the park they used to visit together on weekends. Every corner of the city felt haunted by memories. Ethan's laugh, his hand holding hers, their plans echoing in old coffee shops and street corners. Was it possible to love someone and still walk away from them? That question haunted her all day. By evening, she had packed a small bag and returned to their apartment. Ethan was there, waiting, worried, quiet. But Maya didn't speak. Not yet. She needed him to ask, not to fix, not to defend, but to truly see her pain. But he didn't. And that silence said everything. Maya sat on the edge of their shared bed that no longer felt shared at all. The closet still held her clothes. The shelves still bore photos of them on vacations, at weddings, laughing over cheap champagne. But the feeling in the room was foreign now, like it belonged to strangers who used to be in love. Ethan entered the room cautiously, as if afraid to break whatever fragile space lay between them. "You didn't come home last night," he said softly. "I needed space," Maya replied, her voice calm but tired. He sat across from her, on the edge of the armchair they bought together last fall. "Look, I know this prenup thing didn't come out right. I handled it poorly. But can we just talk?" Maya nodded. "I love you," he began. "That's not in question. But I've worked so hard for what I've built, Maya. You saw it. You know what it cost me. I just want to protect it. That doesn't mean I don't trust you." She stared at him. "But if you trust me, why do you need legal protection from me?" Ethan ran his fingers through his hair. "Because trust isn't enough. People change. Feelings fade. I don't want us to end up in a courtroom if things ever go wrong." "But why are we planning for if things go wrong instead of planning how to keep things right?" she asked gently. He didn't answer. "I stood by you when there was nothing to protect," she said, her voice breaking for the first time. "And now you're telling me that I need to sign a paper to prove I'm not here for your success?" "It's not about you," he whispered. "But it is about me," she said, tears brimming in her eyes. "Because it's about who you believe I might become if things fall apart." There was a long, heavy pause between them. "I can't do it, Ethan," she finally said. "I can't sign something that makes me feel like I'm already one step outside this relationship. I want to be your partner, not your potential problem." Ethan's face dropped. "So, what are you saying?" "I'm saying," Maya stood slowly, voice steady now, "I won't marry a man who prepares more for our failure than he does for our future." It hung in the air like thunder. Final. Sharp. She wasn't angry. She was clear. There was a difference. "I love you," she said. "But I also love myself enough to walk away from something that asks me to shrink." Ethan sat in stunned silence, watching the woman he thought he'd grow old with walk away from the version of love he had offered. And in that moment, Maya realized, sometimes, protecting your heart isn't about building walls, it's about knowing when to stop proving your worth to someone who questions it. The morning after she left Ethan, Maya didn't wake up in their bed. She woke up in her sister's guest room, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like lavender and detergent, not cologne and comfort. The house was quieter, smaller, without the hum of the espresso machine Ethan had insisted they needed. But in that quiet, Maya found something unexpected: peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from resolution. It was the kind that came from surviving the breaking point. She brewed her own coffee, opened her laptop, and began returning to a life she had once put on pause. There were emails from her design clients, a few invoices to finalize. It felt good, grounding, like she was remembering the sound of her own voice. For days, she didn't hear from Ethan. Until one afternoon, her phone lit up with a message. "Ethan, can we talk? I've been thinking about everything. About us." Maya stared at the screen for a long time before responding. "Maya, I don't think I can have that conversation yet. I'm still choosing me." She didn't hear from him again. And, strangely, that was okay. Because choosing herself didn't mean she stopped loving Ethan. It meant she started loving herself more. She began journaling every day, not about him, but about her. About the girl who once believed love meant compromising at any cost. And the woman now learning that boundaries were not walls, but doors she could choose to close. She went back to the old bookstore where they had their first date. Not to relive the past, but to create new memories for herself. She picked up a book on emotional resilience and another on healing through writing. She sat at the same corner table, alone this time, but not lonely. People noticed. Her sister, her friends, even her clients. They saw a quiet transformation, not loud or flashy, but powerful. A woman rising, not from rage, but from resolve. One evening, she passed a young couple holding hands at the park. They reminded her of herself and Ethan years ago, hopeful, blind to the future. She smiled softly, not bitterly. She knew now that love was never supposed to be about who gives more or who protects what. It was supposed to be about choosing, every day, even when it's scary. And some choices hurt. But they still matter. That night, she reread the letter she had written Ethan. She considered mailing it. But instead, she tore it out of the journal, folded it gently, and lit a match. She watched it burn in the sink, no anger, no tears. Just release. Because some things aren't meant to be said. They're meant to be understood within yourself. 6 months had passed. The seasons had changed, winter softening into spring, and with it, so had Maya. Not in the way people mean when they say someone moved on. This wasn't about forgetting. It was about becoming. She had moved into a small apartment overlooking a quiet street. Her business had grown. Her designs were now featured in magazines she used to dream about. But the greatest thing she had built wasn't a career. It was a sense of self. She'd learned how to sit with her own silence and not be afraid of it. How to laugh without checking if someone else was laughing too. How to cry without shame. How to stay. One morning, while sipping coffee on her balcony, she received a wedding invitation from a distant friend. It made her pause not because of the event itself, but because she realized something. For the first time in a long time, the idea of love didn't feel like a wound. It felt soft, like something that could come again if she ever chose it. A few days later, while walking through the farmer's market, Maya saw a man reading alone on a bench. He wasn't remarkable in any obvious way, just quiet, thoughtful, immersed in a book about philosophy. Their eyes met briefly. He smiled, not with intent, but with warmth. Maya smiled back. She kept walking. But the feeling stayed with her, this strange, gentle hope. Not for a new man, necessarily, but for a new chapter. One she wouldn't enter from a place of needing to be chosen, but from knowing she'd already chosen herself. Later that evening, she wrote a short note in her journal. I don't hate him. I don't regret him. I just outgrew the version of love that needed proof, contracts, and protection to feel safe. Now I know real love doesn't ask you to sign away your dignity. It invites you to stay with it because you want to, not because you have to. Weeks turned into months, and one day, a message came through her inbox. Ethan, I saw your recent interview. You looked so confident. I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you. Maya stared at the message. No bitterness rose. No sting. Just a soft exhale. She replied simply, Maya, thank you. I hope you're doing well. She meant it. Closure didn't come wrapped in dramatic endings or tearful reunions. It came quietly on a normal Tuesday, with the understanding that some love stories don't end with forever. They end with freedom. Maya didn't marry Ethan. But she married something far more sacred, her own worth. And in the story of her life, that was the most important vow of all. 2.